Welcome to Chapter 2.2 Blending Modes. This is Part 1. We've got a lot of information to cover, so we're going to break it up into two videos. Our first part is groupings. We've covered accomplishing special effects using the transparency option with layers and tools. Now we're going to take a look at the layer blending modes and how the blending modes affect how each of the colors on the active layer blends with the colors on the layer below. And that, in essence, is what blending modes are about. They're saying we've got a layer here and a layer here, and we're going to choose a blending mode, and it's going to blend the colors on this layer with the colors on this layer. We're going to take a look at this in three parts, and the first part is the blending mode groupings. But first, let's go over a few basics again. Let's start with our base color, and that's the color that already exists. When dealing with the layer blending modes, these are going to be the colors on the active layer. So these would be the colors here in my gradient fill, which would be the rainbow. Then we have our blend color. This is the color that you're going to add with your painting or editing tools, or in the case of layer blending modes, which is what we're talking about, these are the colors in the layer below the active layer. So the colors in this layer underneath the so I've got a rainbow, and then I've got all the colors that it's intersecting with on the picture beneath it. Those are my blend colors. And then we have the result color. That is simply the color you get after the two layers are blended. Now that you have the basic terms, let's take a look at the blending modes themselves, and let's start off with simple groupings. Blending modes are broken down into 6 groups, as you can see here. And we're going to start off with the first grouping is the normal group. And this includes the normal or default blending mode and the dissolve blending mode. These two blending modes basically hide all the pixels on the layer beneath. And unless it's partially or completely transparent, basically what you see is the top layer. The normal blending mode simply fades to reveal what's underneath, while the dissolve blending mode, it yields a granulated scatter or noise effect to the photo. Paint and editing tools have 2 additional blending modes in this grouping: behind, which only paints in the transparent part of the layer, and clear, which edits or paints each pixel and makes it transparent. But those are not available on the layer blending modes over in the layers panel. Normal mode is also called threshold when you're working with a bitmapped or index color image. So just something to remember there. Next we have our darken modes. For this group of blending modes, white is the neutral, and these modes serve to darken the image pixels as they are blended. The third group is the opposite, the lighten modes. And these modes lighten the image pixels as they are blended. For this group, black is the neutral. When I say neutral, by the way, I mean that if you put black on it, nothing happens with the black. It's not affected by the blend. Our fourth grouping is contrast. The contrast modes serve to add or boost the contrast in the underlying layer. For this blending mode group, the neutral is 50% gray. So when you have 50% gray added to it, what you see is no change whatsoever. And you get your changes at the extremes from the darker or lighter pixels, and we'll see that in our next video. Next we have the inversion cancellation blending modes. These are called this because depending on the underlying layer, it's either going to invert or cancel out the colors. For the inversion modes, difference in exclusion, blending with black produces no change because black has a brightness of 0, and blending with white inverts the base color value because white has a 100% color value. The cancellation modes don't really have a neutral, but it's important to note that basically subtract makes an image black and divide makes an image white. And we'll cover that in future videos as well, but that's just a quick overview there. The last grouping of blending modes is the component group of blending modes. And these change the actual color values of the image. The first three, hue, saturation, and color, are known as color component blend modes. And the luminosity blend mode creates the inverse effect of color mode. Let's talk about opposite. With opposite blend modes, basically you have exactly that, the opposite. We have one set, the darken and the lighten modes. These are exact opposites of one another. They do exactly the opposite thing from the other. So just consider that's a good way to remember what they do, is to remember darken modes darken, lighten modes lighten, and each has an opposite mode. Next, we have what's known as the special 8. With the special 8, blend modes react differently to fill opacity than standard opacity. And basically the special 8 are color burn, linear burn, color dodge, linear dodge, vivid light, linear light, hard mix, and difference. What you have to remember here is you've got fill opacity and you've got standard opacity. And with these special 8 blending modes, these two react differently to fill than they do the standard opacity. That's not true of the others. For the others, if you change the fill opacity or the standard opacity, it's going to make the same effect basically. So let's take a look at that and see how that actually works out. Here I have a scene, a day at the beach scene. And basically, if I set my fill to 43%, I have a certain look. And if you take a look, I'm going to blow that up so you can see it. That's my look at 43% fill opacity. I'm using the color burn of the special 8, by the way. Now, what if I put that fill opacity back and change the standard opacity? It's going to be a different look. It may be subtle differences, but the differences are there. And there's our 43% standard opacity. Now, just so you can take a look back and forth between the two, let's do that. I saved a couple of layer comps, so I want to look at color burn at 43% fill opacity and color burn at 43% standard opacity. There we go. Notice the difference. The one with the fill opacity is much brighter than this one, which seems to have like almost a gray screen over it. It's just much dimmer. And we don't have this same, if you notice here, you've got in the standard opacity, it's showing off this little hit of sun is what this is, because the other photo is actually a daytime photo. We've got a night sky over a day photo. But here, it lightens the whole beach. You can actually see the whole beach. So just keep in mind, the special 8 are exactly what they say. They're special because they differ in the fill opacity than the standard opacity. Now, our last item, the commuted mode. Well, commuted modes we have 4 or 2 sets: overlay and hard light, and luminosity and color. When you have 2 blend modes and they're commuted versions of each other, basically, if you apply one of these blends to the active layer, you could get the same results if you add the other one, the other or commuted blending mode, to the underlying layer and then reverse the order of the layers. Let's take a look at our commuted modes and how they'll work like they say. Basically, so I've got a gradient fill on top of my photo of my boy with a snake, and I'm going to choose overlay and hard light as my commuted mode. So on this top layer, I'm going to turn it to overlay, and notice what I have here. Okay, now what if I chose hard light on this, on the background copy, and just moved it up top? Well, let's see. I'm going to go back to normal on that. Let me grab my background copy, move it on top, and make it hard light. Do I get the same thing? Yes, look at that, I do. The rainbow has exact same effect as it did when I had overlay as the blending mode, but the gradient fill was on top. That's what commuted modes are. Next, we'll be looking at each blending mode and how they change based on color blends and that kind of thing. See you next time.